pretty much going to get a copy on Pulsechain. So there's the hook in the jaw.
$2 million sacrifice of SHIB for Pulse. So the SHIB community, in my opinion, might be pretty big on Pulsechain.
It very well could be. And there's nothing that anybody can do, right, to stop the freight train of things that are going to be launching and deployed on Pulse. Nothing. So the argument isn't, oh, how do we stop this or stop that? That's a joke. That's not happening.
There's a breakdown of how many wallets are under $1,000 invested versus the higher amount. That's a very interesting chart.
Something else that's interesting between them, I think you really would want to, especially on Pulse, you'd almost want to filter everything less than like $5 or $10. The other thing though, on a more serious note that actually is interesting between the two, if you pull up the larger players have less risk, less concerns, less unknowns, they went heavier on Pulsex. And then you saw the community grow. So you see a lot of, say, like 10,000 and below. But if you look in the middle, there's kind of a noticeable kind of a U shape to the values of people that sacrificed in Pulsex. And I think that's interesting because I think what you saw is that most people went in heavy on Pulsechain and things like that, but you can see that it brought in a lot of smaller players and that the bigger players went in heavy. And another thing that's really interesting about the large players that I think should give everyone a little confidence. So if a lot of times, like when people are in crypto, the reason that there's such a grassroots feel is that unreasonable upside. If you have $10,000 to invest and I tell you that you can lock in no questions asked, you can lock in 15% a year with zero risk, who cares? $150, blah, blah, blah. Like it's just not enough hit, right? It's going to be 1,500. Like it's just not going to have enough value. But if I tell you that you have the upside at 100x or 150x or any of these crazy multiples, right? That's a chance to elevate someone in life, right? Where they're going from, poor to not poor, from not poor to being able to buy mom a house, whatever things you're into, just that, whatever it is to move up an economic rung. What's interesting about Pulse and Pulsex is the amount of players who dropped in 7 figures. And I think a lot of people feel that there's that dilution effect, big players move in, they always win, that kind of thing. And I understand that. But think about what it means if you put in $1 million+ into a crypto that you haven't seen yet. That person, if they got 15%, they're making 150 grand a year. That's very different. They don't need that radical upside of 10,000x or 100x. Like, 10,000x for them is hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of resources. When you see that many players moving that amount of funds, that is an astronomical vote of confidence because 1, they can put their money anywhere. 2, they've already done things to make a lot of money. And 3, they're also at a point where they do not need that radical upside. They're looking for more security on value. So the value proposition is much different for those players. And to see that many people put in that amount of money gives a huge amount of buoyancy to the system.
I would have to agree with that.
And you can see these things play out. And if you think about wealthy people, you can see that, right? This is the reason that so many non-financially sort of traditional places where people make huge amount of funds. You win the lottery, you're broke in 5 years, probably worse than you were, right? You see this with tons of pro athletes and all those things. They have a ton amount of funds, but because they don't use them the way that they didn't come with the sort of financial literacy and lumps that it would take to make those in more traditional ways. And you see that, right? That risk, that money goes fast. So very wealthy people are very sensitive to risking principal. So it matters when they throw money like that around.
Hey, brother. Hey, just wanted to get your thoughts on the next bull market. Money Market TV, there's a prediction that Feds will start cutting rates at the beginning of 2023. If that happens, there's a prediction that they will cut rates down to 1.5% by the end of 2023. Looking at, the next bull run, which would be great for everybody that's waiting on Pulse. Do you see that happening at the beginning of 2024 or somewhere in, 2023?
I do not feel that the bottom is in for Bitcoin. I have close friends that are very good at what they do that think it is, but I've been around for a very long time and Bitcoin is limp dick. It's just super limp right now. If you look at the 300-day moving average, that's generally a bottom, a massive bottom. That would be a massive bottom. But then again, we have a lot of negative externalities that we just did not see in the last cycles. Generally, you're going to get a front running on the price of Bitcoin before the next halvening of Bitcoin. And the halvening is kind of that kind of benchmark for when the next bull cycle will actually begin. And so I'm not going to deviate from that. I think that 2024 will be front run. The halvening will be front run for Bitcoin. And then we'll after the halvening, I don't believe we're going to go into a bull run for Bitcoin before the next halvening. I think we're going to go sideways for quite some time. Once we find the bottom for Bitcoin, we're going to go sideways like we normally do for a protracted amount of time. Halvenings in 2024, that'll be front run, and then we'll go into the next cycle. But you add on to that all these negative externalities in the economy right now, and to me, it makes no sense to be bullish prior to wiping some of those things off of the deck. And that's why it's so important to know what part of the cycle you're in right now. Because if you know that Bitcoin's not going on another bull run anytime soon, the halvening's not here, there's too many negative externalities, the GBTC discount is 32% on Bitcoin. I don't see it happening prior to the Bitcoin halvening in terms of a real bull market. Now, in terms of Pulse Chain launching, I believe that Richard will launch the chain when it's done, like he's always said. But I also do believe that since I asked Richard in a live stream the question, are you going to time the market? And he said no, the times are different than when he said no the last time. And I also know that he does like to launch in a bear because he said that he likes to launch in a bear. It's just better for the chart because you don't run into all these Fibonacci retracement levels on the way up, making it very hard to go back up. So I believe that he'll launch it when it's ready. When it's ready to go, he's going to look at the market, because this is what I would do. I think this is what you would do. Once Pulse is ready to go, you have to take in consideration what the market is. In a way, you do. It's just a smart thing to do. If he thinks that, Bitcoin's going to capitulate to 10,000 and we're at 20,000, that's a 50% retracement on Bitcoin. That's going to tank the entire market that much further. So that's kind of just my summary on it.
Thank you very much for that. I hope that he actually launches in a bear market, to be honest.
So yes, we're in a bear, and we're in a bear in crypto, and we're not cleared of that. We're not going to be cleared of that, in my opinion, for quite some time. We're going to be going sideways for quite some time. The Bitcoin runs the show for crypto. If Bitcoin is down at these levels, you ain't going to get a bull run in crypto. You ain't going to get a bull run in crypto until Bitcoin goes back up. It's just that simple. But it's a major risk on asset right now in a very volatile environment.
So it sounds like 2023 would be a good time to launch Pulse. Like, even if it's ready in 2022, it sounds like 2023 might be a good time, especially if they start cutting rates. That would be the time to really launch it at that point in time, when they start cutting rates.
It's very interesting because what you'll see is we were like on a precipice thinking that maybe we were, Bitcoin was going to turn around, and it just freaking fell through the bottom. It was like within 2 weeks of that Pulse is going to be postponed, and it has not stopped since. I mean, it went from whatever it was, 34,000 down to 17. Now, I'm glad that Pulse wasn't launched then. It would have done the same impact, everything else. So I'm saying that I do think that there is a piece to launching a blockchain to when you launch it. I think it's dumb to say that that's not a component to the formula. And I think that it was smart to not launch it mid-May, even if it was ready to go, because Bitcoin got destroyed, which would have destroyed the chart and created like 8 Fibonacci retracement levels that we would have to fight up against on the way back up. So to me, if I'm Richard, I'm not launching it. I'm going to wait and see how far Bitcoin's going to drop. And we already know that he's been telling people that he thinks it's going to be 85% from the top. And we already know that he's told people that it's better to launch it in a bear because you don't have to deal with those negative issues. But he's also said the other thing when I asked him the question. So that's the problem, is when you ask the question at the time, because the industry's moving all the time. I would prefer that he launched Pulse Chain at the bottom of a bear and not when Bitcoin still has to drop 50%, because it'll just be better for the chart. What I am excited about is that we're going to start off with hundreds of thousands of users on Pulse Chain. But when it comes to Richard Hart's ecosystem and Pulse Chain, yeah, there are some people that are passionate about making sure that people are educated on what they're doing and why they're doing it. And let's define the term so that you actually know what is really Richard Hart ecosystem and what is not. It's so obvious that so many people have used Richard Hart to make themselves more wealthy. He's very smart in what he does. I mean, he created the Sacrafice set.
But something that's interesting is that the non-OA supply is actually higher on Pulsex than it is on Pulse. But the Pulse will have a lot more liquidity at launch. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of shape some of these curves takes and how things move compared to what you generally see with launching cryptos.
Hey, Wallace, do you want to talk about the wallet amount of Pulse Chain versus Pulsex?
Yeah, so the amounts are a little different because the OA wallet has moved funds around. But what you have non-OA, which I think is by far the more impactful and important thing, was around 660 million for Pulse. So I think we figured this out when we did the math. When you figure in kind of a rough estimate for the AMM bot, which you'll have to mint some extra Pulse, and that'll be the final minting of Pulse that ever happens. You have around 15 trillion, give or take, maybe a little less than that, maybe closer to 14. But with Pulsex, it's slightly higher actually. But there was less overall because of the OA, and now all that hex is sitting in the Pulsex. So it'll be hard. You actually have to do some digging if you actually want to go through. But Money Gang Crypto, he posted some estimations on the supplies that were pretty close.
The last time I looked and we ran spreadsheets with Profex, the total sacrifice came in at about 127 trillion Pulse. 114.9 trillion was the OA sacrifice. When it was all said and done, the circulating supply for Pulse is about 20.1 trillion. Are those the numbers that you're still working with?
It's the exact same thing. It's been a while since I've looked at them, but that was the numbers I was going off of. I was thinking the supply was a little less, and then you have to add the AMM fixer bot amount. So, but yeah, it's somewhere around there.
6.4 trillion was the last that Profex worked up for the AMM.
I have a feeling it'll be less than that. I have a feeling there'll be pools that don't get fixed, and I don't think that full amount of liquidity will be placed back. It makes less and less sense as we've gotten a chance to dig through these. So I think there'll be less liquidity for Pulse than any of those kind of original estimations. So one that would lower the supply, but also lower that liquidity, because it's very different to launch with that much liquidity, especially with a lot of things that are semi-broken. So you wouldn't really want to put liquidity that basically just adds drain, that will route through the pairs and do some weird stuff in V2. So I think we'll see less minted than we initially assumed.
What's the amount of wallets that we have for Pulse versus Pulsex?
It's 41,000 for Pulse, and I think it's 150,000 for Pulsex.